We are coming on the air with more breaking news. President Trump posting on his Truth Social platform that he has fired Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and that he will nominate Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to become the next DHS secretary. The president writing, quote, "I am pleased to announce that the highly respected United States Senator from the great state of Oklahoma, Markwayne Mullin, will become the United States Secretary of Homeland Security effective March 31st, 2026. I want to bring in Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, when I spoke with the president just a few weeks ago, he still had a lot of confidence in Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, pointing to the border, but something has changed over the last few weeks, and what was it?
Well, it's interesting, Tom, you make that point. So this news, I think you can say, is stunning, but it's not surprising. We know the president has grown increasingly frustrated by Kristi Noem's performance as the Department of Homeland Security secretary, most notably after a series of events that took place over the course of the last several days where she was testifying before Congress. She had been asked a series of questions specifically about the role she played in approving contracts, and notably one, a $220 million ad campaign that was used to encourage immigrants to this country to self-deport. The senator from Louisiana, John Kennedy, said on that issue the president was, in his words, quote, pissed. During the course of the questioning, Noem told Kennedy that the president knew about her decision to approve the ad campaign contracts. You can imagine that did not sit well with the White House, certainly with the president as well. And so that appears to have been the tipping point in this moment. There had previously been some frustration by the president as it related to Noem for her handling of the operations, the immigration enforcement operations that had taken place in Minnesota. So what happens now? The president did not make clear in the course of this post who serves as Secretary of Homeland Security right now. Does Kristi Noem serve in that post until Markwayne Mullin can be confirmed? The president in his post said that Mullin will become the next Homeland Security Secretary. Obviously, he needs to be confirmed first. He is a popular Republican. It does not appear, with Republicans maintaining a majority in the Senate, that would be a problem, but it doesn't happen with a snap of the finger, as the president indicated on March 31st. So there are a lot of details still here to be ironed out. And Tom, notably, you talked about your conversation with the president airing in part during the Super Bowl and the week leading up to it. I was revisiting part of the comments that the president had you at that time. You asked him specifically about Kristi Noem and if he had confidence in her, and he really didn't speak about Noem specifically, but about the way he and his administration has handled the border. Your interview may have given us the first sort of sense of some of the frustrations that were beginning to build.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.